Our content is presented by BetOnline, which is your number one source for the NBA Finals and Stanley Cup playoffs this season. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on all the action. Use promo code BELIEVE. That is BLEAV for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online. The game starts here.
We have spent a lot of time, both of us, in our own time, putting together ranking the SEC teams' schedules for 2024. Now, this took some time going into the schedules, dissecting them, who they're playing, all that kind of stuff. So we have ranked them from least tough to tough, easiest, hardest, however you want to do it, from 16 down to 1, 16 being easiest, who we think down to 1 being the hardest. So we're going to go back and forth here on our SEC teams' schedules, rankings for 2024. So we'll start at 16, the easiest, and work our way down. All right, I'll start with my 16, Chris. Then you can follow. I've got Ole Miss at 16. Ooh, with the easiest schedule. As I look at theirs, I mean, and it's hard because I feel like every team has got some teams that are tough to beat on their schedule. Ole Miss has Georgia. They have Oklahoma and LSU. I think those are the 3 toughest games. And the only one that is away out of those 3 is they are at LSU. They get Georgia at home. They get Oklahoma at home. Other than that, I see, pretty winnable games on the schedule for them. But Georgia is going to be tough. Obviously, LSU, Oklahoma, those are all going to be 3 tough games. But the only one of those that they have to go to or on the road is to Baton Rouge. I think it's very good that Ole Miss has Georgia and Oklahoma at home. So, I think that could be debated, but I have them at number 16 with the least tough schedule.
I'm close on Ole Miss, but I've got Missouri at 16. And the way I did this, and look, this exercise, this is why I was talking about you being the tough teacher. You start doing this and you start going, A&M at home, Oklahoma at home. So what? It's the road trips to Alabama and Georgia and LSU that are killers. I mean, that's how tough this league is. The games start to run together. But the 3 toughest games for Missouri, at Alabama, Oklahoma, at A&M, probably in that order or something close to it. I mean, the other road trips at South Carolina, at Mississippi State, nothing's easy in this league. They get Vandy on the schedule, and the out-of-conference schedule is a piece of cake. Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, and who am I missing here? There's one more in here. Oh, at UMass. So I think Missouri, it feels like Missouri was the team that most people thought got the toughest schedule. But by the way, I did go Ole Miss at 15, so we weren't far off.
Yeah, and I actually went Missouri at 15. So we just, flip-flop those. But I think it's, and it's funny because both of those teams, Chris, are who most people have in the playoffs. Most people, when you look at playoff projections, they have Ole Miss and Missouri both in the college football playoff. And it just so happens that both of those teams have pretty favorable schedules. If you want to make a playoff run for both of these teams, this would be it when you look at the schedules. I mean, we mentioned the games that they play, but this sets up nicely for both Ole Miss and Missouri if they want to make a push to the playoffs, but based off their schedule.
Yeah, if you want to pick them apart with the fine-tooth comb, here's where I separate a little bit. Missouri does draw Vanderbilt, whereas Ole Miss does not. And also the out-of-conference schedule at Wake Forest. That should be a game that Ole Miss wins, but that's tougher than whatever Missouri's got on its schedule. That probably the toughest out-of-conference is Boston College at home. So, and also MTSU, not always a pushover, although that should be pretty easy. That's Derek Mason's team, by the way, if you didn't notice. But I mean, we're splitting hairs here, but that's kind of how I differentiate it.
Yeah. So at number 14, I had Ole Miss, 16, Missouri 15. Chris had those flipped. At number 14, I've got the Texas Longhorns. when you look at it, they make a road trip to an SEC play to Texas A&M, final game of the season. I think that's the toughest road game in conference. They do have to go to Michigan, though, in a non-conference game, which obviously would be tough. They do have Georgia. They have Oklahoma. Obviously, Oklahoma at a neutral site. They get Georgia at home. But I think when you look at road schedule, and I think, playing in Austin, that is a tough place to play for any team who comes to play Texas. And so really their only tough conference road game at Texas A&M. You get Georgia at home. I think it's a pretty good schedule for the Longhorns.
Yeah, I stayed in the state, but I picked a different Texas team, and I took Texas A&M.
Okay.
4 toughest games. I want to make sure I didn't miss something here. Notre Dame, Missouri, LSU, and Texas. And there's a common denominator here. They're all at home. So
yeah,
that was something that popped to me a little bit. I probably got A&M ranked lower than a lot of people. And if you want to pick nits a little bit, well, actually not. The out-of-conference schedule, other than that, McNeese, Bowling Green, New Mexico State, those should be some pretty easy wins. Your road trips are to Auburn, to South Carolina, to Mississippi State, to Florida, relatively speaking. Nothing in the SEC is easy, but that's an easier slate, I think.
Yeah.
I probably got A&M lower than most people, but when I dug in, I thought, feels like some teams ahead have got tougher sledding.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. When you really look at who they've got at home versus on the road, that's huge. At number 13, who do you have at number 13, Chris?
I've got LSU, and I'm going to make sure I haven't missed something here, but it's a similar thing. Toughest 4 games are probably Alabama, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, and Southern Cal. And Southern Cal, I believe, is that game in Vegas?
It is in Vegas, yeah.
Okay, so it's not a road game, and that's a big thing. It is away from Baton Rouge. Also got UCLA will be down, but that's a home game. Ole Miss will be at home. Alabama will be at home. Oklahoma will be at home. Toughest road games. A&M is probably the toughest road game by far, maybe followed by South Carolina. But I just thought, again, some of these teams, and the way I did this, Chase, I tried to emphasize top heaviness. Because, 2/3 of this league, if they're not winning 8 or 9 games, at least they're disappointed. Well, the ones you're most likely to lose are those top 25 type opponents, and especially the ones on the road. So I may have missed some stuff later down the list, but when I looked at that with A&M and LSU, what popped to me is they didn't quite have as many games, maybe against potential top 25 teams, and they got a lot of those, if not all those, at home.
Yeah, I actually have LSU at 13 as well, pretty much for a lot of the same reasons. When you have Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma, specifically all at home, I think that's huge. A&M, obviously a tough place to play, like you were just talking about, but with that being their toughest road game, kind of like Texas. I mean, both of their toughest road games are at Texas A&M, and they both have a neutral site game against a pretty good opponent, but I think LSU 13 is a good spot. At number 12, I've got the Tennessee Volunteers. Looking at their schedule, they do have to make a trip to Georgia and Oklahoma. They host Alabama, which I think is very good for them. They're non-conference. They have North Carolina State, but that's at home, and I think that's a winnable game in Knoxville. I've got them at number 12.
I have Texas in this spot. And the reason I had Texas' schedule being a little tougher than yours, look, they got Michigan and Georgia, and the Michigan game is on the road, I believe. So I look for those games where you're going to be probably an underdog, and those are 2 where they might be. Oklahoma, never easy game. That's a rivalry game, and they got to go to A&M at the end of the season.
Yeah,
when A&M will probably be improved. Now, in between. They get Vanderbilt, they get Mississippi State, they get Florida, Arkansas, maybe debatably the 4 teams at the bottom of the conference. Kentucky's probably the bottom of the half. And again, I could have, you may be right, because I tended to put more emphasis on the top heavy portion. And an at Michigan to me was just one of those things stare me in the face. All right, that's a big boy ball game for anybody right there.
Yeah, and that's I think that's a good case for Texas's schedule there. So you got them at 12. At number 11, I've got the Aggies of Texas A&M there. So I kind of you had them a little bit higher there. I've got them there at number 11 again. They get to host Texas, Notre Dame, LSU, Missouri. They get all those at home, like you mentioned, which is a good schedule for them, I think. And I'm interested to see how they compete against these teams. You know, when you look at where these teams could be ranked, I think that could be the tough thing for A&M is that could be a lot of really top 10 teams when they play with Texas, Notre Dame, LSU, and Missouri. So yeah, I got A&M there at number 11.
Yeah, I'm trying to make a decision. I've got my team down, but I think I'm going to make a switch as we're going to do this. I'm going to go with Tennessee in that spot.
Okay.
And I flipped them for another former SEC East team that I'll get to in just a minute. But there was one more game on here that I hadn't taken account of, and kind of a rivalry game at that. But Tennessee has got at Georgia, Alabama, at Oklahoma, NC State. So that's not easy right there. But you look down the rest of the schedule, a lot of winnable games. Again, they draw Arkansas, they draw Florida, although that's been a tricky game for Tennessee. They draw Mississippi State. They got Vandy. They got a game with UTEP in a non-conference schedule that outside of NC State isn't that tough. So this feels like the right territory for the Vols.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I mean, when you look at the whole thing together there, but yeah, moving to number 10. So we have reached our top 10, and let's see, at number 10, I've got the Alabama Crimson Tide there at number 10. You've got games. You do have Georgia. It's at home. You have to go to LSU, to Tennessee, which I think are going to be the two toughest. You do get Missouri, but that's at home. You have to go to Oklahoma late in the season, but you also get Auburn at home. I think for Alabama, this is a really good mix of home versus away, and who you have at both of those places is not a year. This would be much different if it was Georgia, LSU, Tennessee all the way. But the fact that they have Georgia home and Missouri at home, I think are huge for Alabama. But again, the trips to LSU, Tennessee, and Oklahoma, there's no doubt those are going to be tough. But when you look at the schedule, and Wisconsin, but when you look at the schedule overall, I think this is a pretty good schedule for Alabama.
Yeah, I'm close on Alabama. I'm not quite there yet. The next one I had, and this is where it starts to get really tough, is Kentucky. And I'm a little concerned. Here's the toughest games: Georgia, at Texas, at Ole Miss, at Tennessee, in Louisville in the year. Those are the kind of the top 5 teams. But Mark Stoops also did that thing where he schedules himself a bunch of wins. So he's got Southern Miss, Ohio, Murray State in there. None of those should be too challenging. Yeah, they've got Vandy, they've got South Carolina, they got Florida, they got Auburn, probably lower half of the league teams. And again, it's tough through here, but that's why I went Kentucky next.
Yeah, and I've actually got Kentucky at number 9 on my list. So similar to where you are, and a lot for the same reasons. They do draw some tough road trips, but like you mentioned, it's the non-conference for me. When your toughest non-conference is Louisville, a team who you have absolutely dominated in recent history. Those are that's where you're going to find your wins. And so, yeah, I've got Kentucky there at number 9.
Yeah, I've got Auburn at 9, and this is one where I had some debate too. I mean, gosh, at Alabama, at Georgia, at Missouri, plus Oklahoma, plus Texas A&M. But again, you get Alabama, A&M, New Mexico, ULM, some built-in wins there. You got Vandy on the schedule. You got Arkansas on the schedule. You got a winnable game against Cal. That won't be bad. I just felt like Auburn maybe had a few built-in wins there potentially, although I guess you could say most every team does, other than one or two. We'll get to those at the top end. But, yeah, again, this is where it started to get really tough for me.
Yeah, same. I completely agree with that. I feel like making my list on paper. If you look at my paper, there's all kinds of scratches and moving teams around. I've actually got Auburn at number 8, so kind of a similar thing there. Just based off their non-conference. You look, they do have to make trips to Georgia, to Alabama, to Missouri. 3 very tough games, 3 tough places to play. They do get Oklahoma and Texas A&M at home though, which I think are pretty favorable there. So yeah, I've got the Auburn Tigers there at number 8. So who is your number 8, Chris?
Okay, Auburn, of course, again is my 9. If we're not making the listeners dizzy by now, and I've got Alabama at 8.
Okay, the Crimson Tide there at 8.
Yeah, and I could bump up Alabama a notch or two if I thought Wisconsin was going to be what Wisconsin's been most of the last 15 or 20 years. But I think they're supposed to be down a little bit. That's a road trip. So that's one to watch for that can make the schedule a little tougher than people think.
Yeah, that is for sure. So who is next on your list? What are we at, number 7?
Yeah, I've got Georgia here. And boy, talk about a gauntlet of road games. At Alabama, at Texas, at Ole Miss. Throw in Tennessee and Knoxville and Clemson to open the season. And boy, that's not an enviable slate there, not to mention a road trip to Kentucky, which has been a little tricky for Kentucky.
It has, yeah. I've actually got Georgia in that same spot. Again, based off of Texas, Ole Miss, and at Alabama. I mean, those are and you look at if this was another team, if this was not Georgia with this schedule, this would be a super tough schedule again because you're at Texas, at Ole Miss, at Alabama. You also play Tennessee. You also start off with Clemson. Any other team, I think this would be higher than 7. But because it's Georgia and because obviously they're one of the best football teams in the country, you can kind of put it more towards the middle of the stack here. But yeah, I mean, Georgia did not get any help when the SEC schedule came out. That's for sure.
No, not I mean, a couple easy games on that schedule: UMass, Tennessee Tech, and Georgia Tech is not what it used to be, which helps a little bit too. But let's face it, Georgia has not struggled with that level of opponent in a long time, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Let's move into our top 6 now. Who do you have at number 6?
I've got Vanderbilt at 6, and I could make the case that Vanderbilt's higher just by the fact that poor team doesn't play in front of its own fan. I mean, even when they've got a home game, it's not a home game. So here's what you got. You got Alabama and Texas in Nashville. You got at Missouri. You got LSU at night. You got Tennessee and Nashville, but again, doesn't matter. And then you got Virginia Tech as an opener. So for a team that needs some built-in wins, that's half the schedule right there alone where it's going to be a double-digit underdog.
Yeah, I've actually got Arkansas at number 6, just because of the amount of teams they have coming to Arkansas. Now, again, this is a tough schedule for Arkansas. It's hard to find some good wins for the Razorbacks, honestly. But they have to go to Missouri. They have to go to A&M. I think those are the 2 toughest road games. They do have Texas, Ole Miss, LSU, and Tennessee, who all come to Arkansas. But there's a lot of ranked teams are going to be taking on the Razorbacks. But again, a lot of those are at home, which I think helps some. Maybe they can get something going there in Fayetteville. But I've got Arkansas there at number 6, and I've got Vanderbilt number 5. Just again, we're talking about Vanderbilt, and you got a Texas, Alabama, LSU, Missouri, and Tennessee on the schedule. Some of those teams Vandy's used to play in, like Tennessee and Missouri both being teams out of the SEC East they're used to playing, but these are all going to be really good teams that Vanderbilt plays. So I've got them at number 5.
I've got Mississippi State at 5. And again, you start with that road trips to potential top 5 opponents. They got at Georgia, at Texas. That's a brutal start. They got Ole Miss in a rivalry game. They got Missouri. They got a road trip to Tennessee. They got Texas A&M. You look at built-in wins. It's probably Eastern Kentucky, Toledo, and UMass, and that's about it. Even a road trip to Arizona State, I think at Starkville, that game's a little easier, maybe a little bit more of a toss-up on the road. I could argue State's higher than 5, but boy, we've got some real tough schedules in front of us to go to.
Yes, that is certainly the truth. I'll moving into number 4. I've got South Carolina number 4. And again, they've got a tough schedule here. It's again, you look, they've got Ole Miss, Alabama, LSU, Missouri, Oklahoma, and then of course their rivalry game against Clemson. They have to go to Alabama, they have to go to Oklahoma, and to Clemson. They get Ole Miss and LSU and Missouri all at home. But just the sheer number of ranked teams that they will play this year, and then a trip to Tuscaloosa, a trip to Norman to play Oklahoma, and then a trip to Clemson. I think that's for this South Carolina team in particular, that is a tough schedule.
Yeah, we're in the same range. You said South Carolina was your 4?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna tell you South Carolina was my 3 and Arkansas was my 4. And I think with Arkansas, the thing that stands out, that game at Oklahoma State, that's another one. They road games there, road games at A&M, road games at Missouri, home games with Texas, Ole Miss, Tennessee, LSU. I mean, that's right there. That's 7 teams that you could potentially see make a playoff. I think A&M and Oklahoma State may be stretching a little bit, but they're going to be preseason top 25 teams. And South Carolina is kind of in the same territory. Just not a lot of off weeks there at any point. I mean, they got Akron in there. They do have a game against Vandy. They got a game against Wofford. So those help a little bit. But every team's got a couple of those. Well, most every team. But yeah, I mean, we're splitting hairs again at this point.
Yeah, and I've got Mississippi State at number 3. I know you mentioned them a minute ago, but when I look at their trips to Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss, and Tennessee, for a team with so many questions, that's tough. And then they get Alabama at home, they get Missouri at home, which I think is good to have a team like that at home. They get A&M at home, but when I see trips to Georgia, Texas, and Ole Miss and Tennessee, that's brutal for the Bulldogs. Who's your number 2, Chris?
I've got Oklahoma. You get the Alabama, Texas 1-2 punch. You get the road trip to Ole Miss. You get Missouri on the schedule. You get Tennessee. You get a road trip to LSU and built-in wins. Hey, you got Temple in the opener in Maine. Where some other teams are scheduling Kent State. Oklahoma's got Houston and Tulane. I mean, it's just there's not a lot of let-ups in this schedule after the opening week.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I've got Oklahoma there at number 2 as well. No favors when they join the SEC, which is, you look at Oklahoma and Texas, the 2 newest teams to the conference. Texas, we had them up towards the beginning of our rankings with a little bit more of a favorable schedule, but no favors for Oklahoma. I mean, this is a tough schedule for the first year in a new conference, and I think that leaves one more team at our number 1. I believe we're unanimous there in the Florida Gators having the toughest schedule, and it is tough when you look at it. They got Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss, LSU, Tennessee, A&M, and of course Florida State. On the road, they'll go to Texas, to Florida State, and to Tennessee. That's brutal for a team that needs some wins and a coach, Billy Napier, that needs some wins.
Yeah, I cheated a little bit on some of these schedules. I looked at other rankings. I didn't use anybody else's verbatim, but I used it to see is there something that I'm overlooking. And I looked at 1 or 2 that didn't have Florida number 1. I'm like, okay, I get you got some teams with some tough schedules. We just went over South Carolina, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Mississippi State, brutal slates. But I'm like, how could you not have Florida number 1? Because it's got everything in. I mean, this is one of the toughest football schedules I've ever seen this side of the NFL. You got Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss, at Tennessee, Florida State, LSU, A&M, Miami. Built-in wins. The biggest one is Samford in week 2. But remember last time these 2 teams played, what almost happened in that one? I think they combined for about 154 points, it felt like, in that one. And then the next closest thing to a built-in win is UCF. I mean, come on. That's not a built-in win, A, and B, it's an in-state rival that you don't get to play a lot. I don't know if they're trying to get Billy Napier fired with this schedule or not, but that's boy, it does beg some questions.
It does. It is again. It is a brutal schedule there for the Gators, and again, in a team that needs win and a coach that needs wins, they have to go the gauntlet schedule that they do. So those were our SEC team schedule rankings for 2024 from 16 to 1, from who we thought was the easiest to the toughest, and pretty unanimous there on the toughest in Florida. And we had some similarities throughout, kind of the same range in a lot of those teams. So we'll continue. Last week we did coach rankings. This week schedule rankings. We'll do some rankings throughout our shows here on the SEC Football Hour.